Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Licence Subcommittee for the Thursday, 2nd of August at 2 o'clock. Welcome to everybody who's here. We are also live on YouTube. Everybody on this side is sitting on desks will be seen, and you'll only be heard if you toggle on and toggle off with your little speaker there. Fire alarms. I'm not expecting a fire alarm. If it does go off, it's the real thing. If you'd like to leave by the way you came in, it's on the left or on the right. And me outside the slug and lettuce, which is rather apt for a licensing meeting. Mobile phones. If you could please switch them off or put them on silent, especially my councillor colleagues. We have a habit of them ringing, ticking off. Thank you. Right, once again, we're on YouTube. Before we move on to the agenda, let me introduce myself. I'm Councillor Roy Chamdale. I'm the chairman of the committee. Other councillors here who will be making a decision with myself, we have Councillor Gardner and we have Councillor Arnold. I also am assisted by my legal advisor, Mrs. Sony, who's here to ensure that the decisions we make are just and correct. Also, we have from Democratic Services, we have Mr. Fraser, who will be taking minutes of the meeting and ensure I follow procedure. Well, we'll be in trouble. We have other officers here. If you could introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, where you're from.
Steve Dormer, Licensing Officer, Hillingdon Council.
Mr. Holmes, move that way.
David Holmes, Antisocial Behaviour and Environment Officer.
I'm Craig Lloyd, I'm an Antisocial Behaviour and Environment Officer.
Mark Oakley, Antisocial Behaviour and Environment Officer.
Ian Means, representing the Licensing Authority.
And gentlemen, if you'd like to tell us who you're from, where you're from and why you're here.
My name's James Fennick. I am currently Assistant Manager at Captain Morgan's Public House and soon to be licence holder.
I'm Dave Roberts. I am now the manager of Captain Morgan's in full.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome. This is a public meeting in public, not a public meeting. This means on your speaking rights. Right, we follow the agenda now. Apologies for absence.
No apologies, Mr. Chairman.
Members, any declarations of interest or matters coming for the meeting? No interest. Okay, and all matters that have been notified in advance, none as urgent.
That is correct, Chairman.
Okay, we move on to Stephen.
Good afternoon, everybody. You've all had the report bundle and are familiar with the salient points of this review application. May I take this opportunity to provide a verbal summary of the application and assist the subcommittee to determine the outcome of this review application. The premises has been subject of numerous noise complaints from nearby residents. The nuisance has been established by authorised officers of the council and deemed to be a statutory nuisance. The application was been brought by Mr. Oakley from the Antisocial Behaviour team here at Hillingdon Council to review the premises licence for Captain Morgan's. Abatement notices have been served and breached by the occupier of Captain Morgan's, and on the 16th of July at Uxbridge Magistrates Court a fine was implemented on Mr. Farrell for the abatement notices being breached, and fines paid and costs adding up to £14,786. The matter has been brought to the attention of the management of Captain Morgan's on numerous occasions of the noise nuisances. The advice and guidance has been given and appears not to be taken seriously by the premises user. The review application is seeking to regulate the entertainment that was subsequently deregulated under current legislative guidelines. This will enable the premises to operate within one or more of the licensing objectives, notably preventing a public nuisance. Captain Morgan's notably is a vertical drinking establishment that offers music and sport-related types of entertainment. The reduction in hours has been set out in my recommendation on Appendix 2, and this may enable the staff and management to keep their livelihoods. Better management and possible rethinking of the business model from all those involved with Captain Morgan's may be seen as an improvement to the daily lives of residents affected by the activities at the premises. This week, the management of the premises have made contact and they're looking to train a new member of staff into getting this individual a personal licence and becoming part of the fabric of the licence. Mr. Bates from the premises has also requested transfer application paperwork from ourselves to submit at a later date. Expanding on from my initial recommendation in Appendix 2, I believe it's important for this premises moving forward that the premises users are trained fully in matters relating to the Licensing Act 2003, in particular the 4 licensing objectives.
Thank you, Mr. Dormer. A few questions from myself. Could you just tell us what the licensing hours are at the moment for regulated entertainment, playing live or recorded music, please, for our members so they're absolutely clear? Sure.
Obviously, regulated entertainment between the hours of 0800 in the morning to 2300 currently is deregulated. So the hours now that are regulated are on a Friday and a Saturday between the hours of 2300 to 0130 the following day.
And from Sunday to Thursday?
Sunday to Thursday, at the moment, that the regulated entertainment is actually on the under the deregulation aspect of the now new licensing regime.
That would mean 11 o'clock?
Up to 11 o'clock in the evening, that's correct.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Thank you. Mr. Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't read through my witness statement. However, for the convenience of this hearing, I would like to highlight the most pertinent points to raise and the amount of breaches to the current licensing conditions. There were complaints received from residents of 9 breaches of licensing conditions since November 2017 that loud amplified music was being played outside of the permitted hours, that is after 0130 Friday to Saturday and after midnight Sunday to Thursday. 4 of the 9 breaches of licensing conditions were witnessed by out-of-hours antisocial behaviour and environment officers. Warnings were given each time an officer was able to engage with a member of staff at Captain Morgan's. You may have noted on my witness statement that on occasions the doors were locked and occupants of the bar refused to open the doors, even though they were aware that officers were outside banging on the doors and glass window. Warnings were also given in the form of noise abatement notices served by post and by hand. Further warnings were given via telephone to Mr. Bates, who described himself as the manager stroke owner of the bar. All warnings were ignored and breaches of the licensing conditions and noise abatement notice were still being reported up until the 20th of May 2018. The impact on residents of the loud amplified music, shouting, screaming and fights outside of the licensing hours have been significant. Loud amplified music and or nuisance from customers has on occasions been as late as 4:30 a.m. Residents are trying to manage on as little as 3 to 4 hours sleep before having to go to work. This is clearly detrimental to their health and is unsustainable. No one from Captain Morgan's has contacted the Antisocial Behaviour and Environment team since being served with a licensing review application. As my colleague said, on the 16th of July 2018, licensee and leaseholder Darren Farrell was found guilty in his absence at Uxbridge Magistrates Court and was fined £3,200 plus costs for 5 offences and breaches of the noise abatement notice. In order to alleviate the impact of the public nuisance from the loud amplified music, but also from rowdy customers gathering outside the bar, smoking, shouting, screaming and fighting, leaving the bar in the early hours of the morning. We are requesting the operating hours for the bar are reduced to 2300 hours Sunday to Thursday, or 11 o'clock p.m, and midnight Friday and Saturday. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I brought with me two antisocial behaviour and environment officers who have provided witness statements and are also available for any questions Chairman or councillors may wish to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Oakley. You mentioned the hours currently, and you said Sunday to Thursday. Could you just tell me what those hours were again on Sunday and Thursday?
My information from the current licence is that it's midnight Sunday to Thursday, not 11 o'clock as my colleague has mentioned.
Is that the opening hours or the time that music is allowed to be played?
The time that music is allowed to be played, I believe.
Councillors, any questions or clarifications?
Not at this time.
I've got one question.
Councillor Gardner?
If the music stops at 11 o'clock, how long is the premises open after that?
I'm requesting that the premises should close at 11 o'clock.
And the music stops at the same time?
Yes.
Okay, cheers.
Thank you. Does Mr. Lloyd or Mr. Holmes want to add anything to that? Mr. Means.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, councillors. Today I'm representing the licensing authority, and the licensing authority is supporting this application. This application came about in the first instance by a complaint received in licensing, as you would expect. Back in 2016, albeit it really began in November 2017, when a local resident who appeared at the time quite reasonable began ringing us from time to time, complaining about some late hours and excessive noise. It appeared that some of the allegations he was making were hours the premises were running in excess of their normal permitted hours, and that there was also a condition on the licence that said about the music must be reasonable. So licensing were basically overviewing this complaint, but the main concept of the complaint was going to sit with our ASBIT team and our noise control people, so he was referred on to them. Licensing played a part only in contacting the manager, Kevin Bates, on 2 occasions, warning Mr. Bates that their complaints were coming in. And we also sent a letter, as is Appendix 3, to the licence holder, warning him and sending him a copy of his licence so that he fully understood what his allowances were. That was all in November. Communications and warnings. After that, really the matter was handed over to our noise team because that seemed to be the main problem. But having got down the road and having seen what the final outcome was with those noise complaints and the continuation despite warnings and other matters, it would appear to us that there was a total disregard to the objectives, arguably to a condition that states music shall be kept at a low level, so a breach of a condition of the licence. And in this respect, and because plenty of warning was given, I cannot see that the pub should be allowed to continue having any music or for dancing or music for entertainment after the normal deregulated hours of 11 o'clock. That should be taken from the licence, and all music for entertainment should end at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meads. So you feel in order to promote the licensing objectives of prevention of nuisance, the conditions which you have suggested would cover that?
Yes, I think obviously deregulation applies until 11 o'clock, so the committee could adjust that. It's in their powers to adjust that. But I think 11 o'clock is a reasonable hour, as did the government when they brought in deregulation. But I think the committee's powers today should deal with this in the way that they can, because loads of warning were given to this premises, and as you can see from the evidence before you, it was totally ignored, and it continued on and on and on after warning. So I can't see they should be allowed any more facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any clarifications, questions? No? Thank you. Moving steadily forward.
Ian, sorry, just one question. Are you going to allow are you suggesting any drinking up time, or a time for music to end and then, for example, half an hour later the premises shut? Or is it all just one big closure?
No, from my view, this whole matter sits alone with music, the level of music, and if that stops at 11 o'clock, then the bar becomes a bar. I don't think there's any complaint too much about the late drinking. I know we've touched on some disorder, and there is in a couple of statements some disorder, but vertical drinking bars and loud music tend to generate that sort of behaviour, and in my experience, if you take away that loud music for entertainment after 11 o'clock, you'll probably tidy up on the other behaviours as well. They'll probably fall into line, because it's the type of people that want to go in there and listen to loud music that come out with the loud music having been in their ears for the last few hours, that come out and are loud and can be excitable outside. But so I think there's a major factor there in allowing the loud music for entertainment. That's where I'm going to go.
Thank you. Now we move on to the licence holders. Who would you like to go first? Mr. James, Mr. Frenwick, or Mr. Roberts? You are Mr. Roberts, yeah?
I took over financial management of the pub in September because the pub was in a very financially precarious position. We owed rates, rent, everything. We couldn't afford to buy the stock because there wasn't enough money about. And so I insisted with the owners, my stepson Kevin, his business partner, that I had to take over full financial management of the pub to get the pub in order. At the same time, I suggested we use the licence to its full extent, because that way we could actually turn the pub around and generate sufficient income that we could pay the bills. In order to do that, although it wasn't a condition on the licence, we engaged James to run the door, being aware that if we opened until late, there could be cause for problems within the neighbourhood, because we would be opening later on a Friday and Saturday than the other bars. So there would be a propensity for people, drunk people, to come down to our pub and cause trouble, which historically it's not a pub that's had trouble. Until Stephen came down, I was unaware of the noise abatement notices that had been served on Darren Farrell. Subsequent to that meeting, I sat down with the owners and insisted that I take over full running of the pub. It's been my local for 18 years, ever since I moved into the area. People in there all know me. It's very much a community. And when there are issues with the pub, I'm the first person they come to speak to. But I'm not prepared to be there till 2:30 in the morning and babysit. There has clearly been very irresponsible behaviour by the licence holder and the owners, but they are no longer involved in the running of the pub. To that end, James is going to take over as licence holder, because he is someone on the premises I can trust. And if I tell him to do something, I know it will be done, and people will not be able to play loud music, and that we can restore order. When we first started opening late, we started with James with one member of staff on, but it did become a popular place for people to come to. And initially we did have some issues with some undesirable people, youngsters who had been ejected from another pub within the locality. To that end, we employed 2 more bouncers on the door staff, and when the Geo Bar closes, 2 more bouncers come down from there. So we have a minimum of 5 bouncers on the premises. As a consequence of this, to my knowledge, the police have only ever been called to our premises once, and that was in respect of a customer. Someone had been glassed in Champers. When something happens in another pub in the area, we have a shut door policy. No one gets in. One customer who wasn't given access to the pub decided she was going to make an allegation that it was racist and called the police to complain about someone being racist to her. To my knowledge, there have been no calls for violent conduct outside the pub or inside the pub. Clearly from the noise, the number of times the officers have attended the premises, there are 2 mentions in there. Of all the times they've visited, there's 2 mentions of antisocial behaviour outside the pub. Now, there's no fighting, there's no mention of any fighting, and yet I'm hearing allegations of fighting outside the pub, and I see no evidence of it. And if there was serious disorder outside the pub, didn't the officers feel obliged to call the police to deal with it? We get significant amounts of trouble. The police have been called to Champers on several occasions. The Ascot, the pizza shops either side of us, which are open till 4 o'clock in the morning, have all had the police in attendance.
Mr. Robert, sorry, just to interject there, we're dealing with this application in review of your licence, so we really need to talk about your premises, not about other premises. This is standalone. Deal with the issues that you've been encompassed. This is your chance to tell your side of the story, so then us then to question it, and then obviously then have a general discussion. So, but if you could stick just to these premises, please. Yeah.
Well, as I say, I would like to hear any evidence of the police having been called to our premises in relation to any fighting. Since we've been opening to those late hours, the pub has been more successful. Eastcote High Street has been more successful because people are being attracted to the area. That, in turn, helps the pizza shops, helps the other bars in the area, helps the taxi companies, because otherwise they will head into Harrow or head into Uxbridge, where they can get their late drink. The history of the pub speaks for itself, though I do believe, irrespective of the loud music, I do believe the pub has been managed reasonably to minimise its impact on the area. With regard to the loud music, after I spoke to Stephen, I got a sound engineer into the pub who, we have a mixer system there, and he has adjusted the volume on that, and we have subsequently been up to the flats where we have tenants, checked the sound levels, and there was no issue other than he thought the bass could still be heard, so we went back down and he reduced the bass another 25%. And I do not believe that there have been any complaints about noise since the time Stephen visited our premises. Can anyone tell me any different to that?
No.
Sorry.
No. Sorry.
The agenda there shows quite clearly how we operate the procedure. I hear from everybody, making sure it's clear. Councillors get a chance to ask any clarification questions. Then there's a discussion, and that's the part where we can ask each other's questions, and then we break away for delivery.
Right. I think the issue with the amplified music has now resolved. I am the only person who knows how to adjust that mixer, and I don't plan on telling anyone how to do it. I regularly request of our tenants upstairs whether they hear any noise. and they have said no noise whatsoever. There is, as James will inform you in a minute, there was an incident the other day, but by and large these incidents that happen have got nothing to do with us, but the fact that we have probably the best doorman in the area working on our premises means that we end up resolving issues for other parts of the town. Do you want to have a word, James?
So, yeah, I mean, essentially, there obviously, historically, there has been allegations brought towards the venue, and
sorry, Mr. Fleming, there are more than allegations, because you've been to court and you've been found guilty of them. So they're not just allegations.
Yeah.
These are actual events which have taken place, been to court.
Yeah, sorry, they're definitely not allegations. They're absolutely justified. I'm not disputing that for a moment. But essentially, as a lot of steps have been put in place to rectify the situation, to deal with all the problems that we've been causing and the antisocial behaviour orders that have been raised. I feel that we have essentially gone up above and beyond what's required of us, however, reacting late to the issues. We are now in a situation where the music is off nice and early. As Mr. Roberts has said, there's been no issues with regard to complaints since we've had Stephen visit the premises. And to remove Darren, Mr. Farrell, from the licence and implement myself as a new licensee with an extensive local knowledge, I feel can only be seen as a positive move. The antisocial orders outside and the potential that there's been physical violence and altercations outside. I myself has been working as security on the bar, and we have not had anything which I would consider to be an awful incident. There hasn't been anything where anybody's got seriously hurt. All issues have been dealt with very quickly and concisely. We have a team of three doormen on a bar that is that small. There's 3 doormen there for the whole entire evening. And then, as Mr. Roberts said earlier on, there is a further supplementary door team which arrives late on at what I would consider the business end of the evening. Granted, these are all have happened in retrospect to the issues that have been brought forward, but they are very apparently, I believe at the moment, they're very apparently working, just by virtue of the fact that of the issues that we've had, none of them still stand as issues. We do, just this weekend, for example, there was an issue in the street. There was a violent altercation which had nothing to do with our bar at all, yet me and my door staff come out, moved away from our premises to further issue, well, just to provide a security presence and hope to deal with the situation. I do believe that police were called, but as I say, these people never came out of our bar. They were just from down the road. And with myself having been within the community for a long, long time and been working within the community for 16 years now, I believe, I have a genuine affection towards this community. Not just the bar, not just the people I know, but the actual community itself of Eastcote. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for that. A few questions. Mr. Roberts, you said you've been involved with the business since, when was it? September. And you said you weren't aware of these issues with noise. And yet
I was aware that some complaints had been made, but I was not made aware of the extent of the abatement notices until Stephen came along to the premises.
So do you know the 4 objectives that we work for in licences? Are you aware of them?
No, not off the top of my head, no.
Well, one of them is prevention of public nuisance, and it's clear. Here in Hillingdon, you know, we're very keen to emphasise We want good business. Business brings in all sorts of good things. But at what cost? One thing we won't do is at the cost of the residents. So could you just tell me in a little bit more detail, what is your actual involvement with Captain Morgan's? Because obviously you're the new manager or new leaseholder as I've got here. So could you just tell me in a little bit of detail, so me and the committee are aware, what is your actual involvement in terms of what do you actually control and how?
I now manage the pub and make all decisions regarding running the pub with backup from James, because I cannot be there 24/7. I'm too old to be staying out until 2:30 in the morning. And so I insisted with the owners that someone was put in place who I could trust.
And who are the owners of the premises?
Kevin Bates and Lenny Houlan.
So Mr. Bates is now not involved in the business whatsoever?
No. He's still owners, but he has no management function within the business.
And how are you going to actually enforce this, sir?
He's my stepson. He would not breach. He's gone past the point. He realises the risk he has now put the business at through his irresponsible behaviour. And he doesn't really want anything to do with running the pub. He knows if anything happens to the pub and its existence, a lot of my friends in the area are going to be very unhappy, and it would be incredibly embarrassing for me. And he is aware of the risk of that now.
When you finish speaking to sir, I understand that, but in terms of, as a committee, we've had 13 incidents that are reported here. I would need something a little bit more robust rather than just, I understand where you're coming from, I understand what you're saying, but in terms of the committee, we've got to be sure that the steps that we put into place will be suitable and sufficient to uphold the licensing objectives. Just to let you know, they're prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, public nuisance, and protection of children from harm. Yeah, and they all carry the same weight. Yeah.
The noise pollution has been dealt with, as I've said, by the restriction of the volume, to the extent that during the World Cup we were pretty busy, but we were getting complaints that people couldn't hear the commentary because the number of the people in the pub were absorbing the sound, but because of the amendments I'd made to the system, that you couldn't turn the volume up so people could actually hear it. That is the price we have to pay. I accept that. It's not ideal, but that is the consequence of the irresponsible behaviour that went on before.
You mentioned hours of opening. You said you've extended the hours. Could you tell me what those hours were, day by day? So start off on Monday, and then right up to Sunday. Could you tell me what your what your closing hours were?
Sunday through to Thursday, we close at 11. Everyone out by 11:30. Friday and Saturday, we started opening till, I think it's 2 o'clock, James, and everyone out by 2:30.
That's what it is now, but initially it was 1 o'clock. Yeah, I think is a question that Mr. Chandler asked.
Yeah, prior to us using the full provisions of the licence, we used to close at 1 o'clock on a Friday and 1 o'clock on Saturday morning, 1 o'clock Sunday morning.
According to the licence now, you were allowed to open until 2:30. So you didn't extend the hours. Are you now saying you reduced the hours of opening?
No. Originally, we didn't use the full hours that we could open to. We were closing at the same time as the other pubs in the area. Unfortunately, on that basis, the pub wasn't really viable. And so I suggested that we open to the later hours on the condition that it was well monitored. Unfortunately, with regards to noise, that didn't happen. That's why things have had to change.
Go to page 29, sir, of the pact. This says that it's showing until 3 o'clock in the morning. The pub plays very loud music late at night, mainly at weekends, but some day on work days too. As well as the music, there's a lot of noise from customers standing outside the pub, shouting, screaming, swearing, fighting. This goes on until 3 o'clock in the morning, and often until after midnight on weekdays.
I don't believe, as James has mentioned, that the shouting and screaming is necessarily reflected due to our pub. There are 2 pizza shops open to us. Sorry, you asked me not to mention that. But other factors involved in that part of the town, and it's not necessarily can be attributed to our customers or our staff. But I do accept that with regards to the loud music, that was going on at hours when it shouldn't have been.
Do you have signage inside the pub? It's to asking your patrons to leave quietly at 2:30 in the morning on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, as it becomes?
We don't have signage because we have 5 door staff who are supposed to ensure that.
So that's a no. You don't have signage. That's okay, fine. That's just a yes or no answer. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few questions. When were these adjustments to your sound system made?
About a week after Stephen paid us a visit.
Right.
Sorry, what date is that? Do you have a date for that?
I believe I visited the premises, looking at my paperwork, the 7th of June.
Thank you. Darren Farrell, is he still involved in business?
No, not at all.
So who is the current designated premises supervisor?
James is going to be taking that. He's already done his course and he will be taking over as a designated officer.
But today, if presumably you're open today, who would be the current designated premises supervisor?
At the moment, it does still stand as Darren. Sorry, my apologies. It does still stand as Darren is on the paperwork. My licence is due to arrive, as of tomorrow.
Thank you.
Questions? Councillor Gardner.
This is to James. The photographs of the premises, it doesn't seem to be particularly big, unless I'm missing the point. But you've got 5 door staff at some point in there.
That is correct, yes.
Why 5? Well, I'm trying to get my head round. If you don't think there any problems apart from the noise that happened before, why would you need 5 door supervisors?
As is often the case with a venue that's open this late, we get people coming there that we simply don't want to let in. So we have 2 access doors to the bar. We have a front and a back door, which both doors need to be manned. It's difficult, I think, in any situation to have a single doorman standing there. It's more likely to be taken advantage of by the chancer customers and things like that. So the bar serving alcohol up until 2 o'clock, as is currently within the licence, does mean that there is a full hour that everybody in the locale. There's a large bar just down the road, a large pub just down the road, which shuts at 12. 2 other pubs within a stone's throw, which shut at 1, which by default means everybody descends upon our bar. That is it. We have quite a strict policy of which we don't let anybody in after 1:30. So, as you can imagine, as people just stroll up the road quite drunk, they're often a little bit confrontational. As was discussed earlier on, there was a lady who called the police because she wasn't allowed into the bar, that she believes for reasons that were somewhat personal. But essentially, there is a bar over the road which has a link to the bar in which we're in. The doorman is supplied, the security is supplied by the same company. So just to further eradicate any chances of issue, when that bar finishes at 1 and they get everybody out by 1:30, they then walk to join us, and essentially it's just a better safe than sorry policy in which we have.
I've sort of got a follow-up, but it's to do with when the customers leave the premises, do you tell them to keep quiet, that bear in mind, I mean, you realise you've got people living above the premises. I mean, you could even get a door supervisor to stand there and go, there are people living up there, can you keep the noise down? I know it sounds a bit frivolous, but I mean, that sort of thing, so that people are incredibly aware of what they're doing. Because I know when people are drunk, they're a bit silly. I mean, I don't drink, so, you know, I'm never silly, obviously. But the point is, I'm just thinking of how you can stop people behaving in such a stupid way. I mean, I don't believe for a minute they're going to leave the premises and just walk up the road and not make a noise. I mean, people who are not drunk aren't going to do that. They chat amongst themselves. But it's just that it's trying to make them aware that there are people around them. And you're not doing that.
I think Councillor Gardner's getting to the point out. Do you have a policy regards patrons leaving the premises? And have you have a policy regards how you're going to maintain a prevention of nuisance?
Yeah, again, in recent weeks, it's something that's been brought in. I myself am front of house. I have always been stood at the front of the house, as Craig and possibly David can attest. I've definitely seen at least one of them before. What you're saying, Councillor Gardner, is perfectly right and accurate. What would be the measure for it? And essentially that is now my job. That's what I do. I go outside and I politely ask everybody to move on for the sake of our neighbours. It's difficult because although we've been told or requested not to discuss other premises and other places, there's Captain Morgan's. Either side of that there is 2 shops, and then either side of those is 2 pizza shops, as Mr Roberts earlier on has suggested, have been open till, well, they're actually open till 3:30 and 4 o'clock respectively, to the right and to the left. And there will be people coming there the whole time, irrespective of where they've been drinking before that moment. I personally do move on our customers from outside the bar, but when they're only moving on 2 shop fronts just to then go and purchase a pizza, it's then a little bit of an issue. It's outside of my control. I do, however, personally provide security assistance to the pizza shops if required.
Sorry, what hours of work are you suggesting you'll be attending? Because I understand from Mr Roberts, obviously, he's not be there until 2:30 in the morning, on the current licence. What hours of work are you going to be working? 7 days a week or whatever?
No, I mean, my main responsibility is the weekend. I have a contractual obligation to be there from 8 o'clock till the close of play on a Friday and Saturday night, and I am essentially available to be utilised whenever Dave is not there during the week. Sorry, Mr Roberts.
Mrs Sony has some questions to ask.
Mr Roberts, this licence was issued in June 2016. Then in November, when you took over the finances, you instructed the owners to make full use of the licence and extend the hours. And shortly after that, of course, the residents' complaints came in. So at the point at which you decided to make full use of your licence, how often was Mr Farrell in the building?
On a reasonably regular basis, hence the loud music.
Could you be more specific? 4 days a week, 5 days a week?
No, largely at the weekend. Seldom. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
And when post is delivered to the premises, were you there to collect it, or was it Mr Farrell?
All the mail is collected by a secretary who handles all the mail and deals with it on Kevin and Lenny's behalf. At the current time, I now intercept the post. Nothing comes to the pub without me reading it.
So you were giving instructions on how the pub is meant to run to improve its financial situation, but you weren't looking at any posts that could be bills or legal letters or anything like that?
No. It was taken... I would get there prior. In the mornings, I would go to cash up at the pub, and I would get there prior to the post being delivered.
You have to understand the incredulousness of the situation where you're making financial decisions without seeing the financial bills that were coming in. My next question is this, and either one of you are free to answer. When did Mr. Farrell stop working for you? When did you tell him his services are no longer?
Well, the decision was made after Stephen's visit. But the initial plan was Kevin Bates to become designated licence holder. But in light of the fine and the situation that Kevin's behaviour has put us in, I did not think it appropriate for him to become the licence holder.
What do either of you understand is the role of the premises licence holder as opposed to the DPS?
Well, obviously, as a licence holder, it's to enforce the four rules, and to. I mean, I would have to select a DPS. The DPS would be my decision of whom I would then get obviously a written agreement to say that they was capable, and essentially, in my absence, the DPS is the one who's responsible. But it makes it my responsibility if things go wrong, if things are being used outside of, if things are being done outside of what is legal, lawful and just respectful to the neighbours, then I am the one who's accountable for that. So for me personally, it is just to be liable, just to ensure that everything's done within the letter of the law and as the licence office sees fit.
For licensing, what do you understand is the letter of the law?
Essentially, it's what's said today. There are rules, but as I'm acutely aware, the councillors themselves and the licence office, certain things and certain rules can be changed, or we could have privileges, if you will, taken away. Like, for example, the 2:30 could then be brought back to 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock. The 18-year-old, you can let in an 18-year-old. We might be recommended to have a minimum 21-year-old policy on the door, which we currently do. This is obviously hypothetical. And yeah, the restrictions on sound and stuff. Does that answer your question, or have I missed the point? Okay, feel free to.
I think one of the points that you need to do, if you look into page 10 of your information pack,
sorry, Mr. Fraser, could I take you up on that offer now for
nothing at all, I'm worried.
Chancellor Chandler, would you repeat what you would like me to look at?
So if you look at page 10, I mean, as a committee, to ensure that, the licensing objectives are upheld, there's, what's the page of that?
Page 9.
Yeah, it starts at page 9, but page 10, I mean, if we start at page 9, 10.2, it shows you what to ensure that we are satisfied that the licensing objectives will be met. Those are the conditions that we can do. And if you look at the last one, we can also revoke the license. If we feel what we've heard today, and what the licence authorities have suggested as well, if we feel those are the options that we have, sir. And as you can see, we can modify the conditions of the licence, or we can actually revoke the licence if we feel that is what is required. So that, to be clear, on page 10, which I was alluding to, is a case law. We do work off case law as well. So cases that come before judges and how they are judged and how conditioned. So it is, this is your opportunity to explain to us exactly how you're going to be managing the business. So be very, very clear on that.
Apologies, I did misunderstand the question in the initial instance.
What I was trying to get at is what your understanding of the licensing objectives are. and how it's going to impact on how you run the premises. To put it simply, how are you going to uphold the licensing objectives? You've done the personal license course, so you're familiar with this terminology. And what role is Mr. Roberts here going to have? Because sitting here as legal advisor, Mr. Roberts is very much the premises license holder and DPS, and you are acting to his instruction.
Yeah, at this moment in time, I'm certainly acting to Mr. Roberts' instruction. He will, of course, be a DPS underneath my personal licence once I receive it, and
I think there's a slight...
How is he going to become the DPS?
Well, he will be essentially there will be powers entrusted in him as manager of the venue to look after the venue in the absence of the licensee. I mean, all financial decisions are essentially David's. Mr. Roberts. Social decisions are going to fall to me over Friday and a Saturday night. And Friday and Saturday night being when the main issues are happening, when the main charges have been brought against us, if you will.
So, you're the premises license holder. You're going to be there mainly at weekends. Mr. Roberts is going to be the DPS. What qualifications does Mr. Roberts have to be the DPS?
I'm not actually going to be the DPS. I think there's been some misunderstanding here. I am making commercial decisions for the pub, and James is going to run the pub from the activities point of view, because I can't be there at the times when there are obviously things happening that are detrimental to the local neighbourhood, and so it will fall to James to manage the pub at all times, and he has accepted that responsibility, because I'm not qualified. I know how to run a business, but I don't know how to run the people side of things. So that is very much why James is being brought in, and why I chose him, because his knowledge of the local area and the fact he is a very responsible individual, and that is what the pub needs.
And just finally, you said Mr. Frenwick has been part of the business up to now. When did he actually start with the business?
Sorry?
Me.
Oh.
I have been working in a security capacity for the...
at Captain Morgan's.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been working in a security capacity for Captain Morgan's. I think it's got to be coming around for about 14 months.
So you're aware of the visits by the antisocial behaviour team and environment officers, and you're aware of them knocking on your window and your doors, and you're aware of the neighbours, the explanation of why they're there. You was aware of all this? That'd be just a yes or no?
No. I do feel there is a caveat.
That's okay, that's fine.
To that
That's just,
question.
if you want to wear, you want to wear. Okay, right. Any more questions, councillors? No? Okay, we now move into the discussion stage, where we'll have a chance of all the parties to provide comments on the submissions that have been made. Any questions from anybody?
Yes.
Mr. Oakley.
Am I allowed to direct questions directly to Mr. Fenwick and Mr. Roberts?
Yeah, they come to me and I'll pass it on to them.
Okay.
It's a weird thing, but that's how the process works.
That's fine. So, mention was made in terms of reference to fights and reference to the police and seriously hurt. I would argue it's not a question of whether somebody's seriously hurt or whether the police are called that is important, or what defines a fight. I would say a fight is when two people are, it could be a verbal altercation, not necessarily a physical one. The point is, the impact that it's having on residents in terms of the loud noise when these fights are going on. And if I could just refer to my statement, page 20, where I mention on the 5th of May at 1:15 a.m., where I witnessed, together with a colleague, a fight, or an altercation, if you prefer that word, and that was actually with Mr. Fenwick, was on the door at the time, and we witnessed the female who
so
was...
which paragraph is that, Mr. Oakley?
Sorry, that's on the 5th of May at 1:15, at the bottom paragraph of page 20. And it's not just the issue of the altercation. The bouncer in question, I didn't know his name, was James Fenwick. It was a question of the impact that was having, the noise. We were parked across the street, and we could hear her shouting, screaming. She had been ejected from the property. She wasn't from any other resident property. She wasn't from any pizza establishment or anywhere else but their bar. And our opinion was it wasn't particularly dealt with very well. In terms of, I suppose a question is that I have seen Mr. Fenwick when I've also turned up at the bar to mention about statutory noise nuisance, and I've only ever seen, admittedly I haven't been in the bar, but I've only ever seen Mr. Fenwick on the door, and I asked to speak to the manager or owner, and that's when Kevin Bates came out. I've certainly never seen 5 bouncers or any more than one person on the door at one time.
Go ahead.
There absolutely is. There's 3 bouncers there from 9 o'clock through to 1:30.
So bouncers mean SIA. Yep.
Door supervisors.
Yes,
There is indeed three door supervisors there from 9 o'clock. I myself am generally there a little bit earlier, from 8 o'clock. But yeah, the 3 of us are there from 9 o'clock through to 1:30, when we would get. And 1:30 is an approximation because they have a job to do over at the bar across the road. They finish and they come to us, but it is always within, I would say, a 10-minute clearance of 1:30.
So what days a week is this are we talking about?
Friday into Saturday and Saturday into Sunday.
Friday and Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
You have no door staff during the week, from Sunday to Thursday?
Not outside of any large events. Of course, at during the World Cup and large football, Champions League final, etc., etc., there will be extra people there. There has been occasions where there's been special events in regard to one of the owners' birthdays or something like that, where we've had staff just to ensure everything runs smoothly during the week. But as a rule, Friday and Saturday.
Mr. Roberts, you said you put a noise inhibitor, installed one. When was this again?
It was about a week after Stephen came to visit us. It's not actually a noise inhibitor. We had a mixer there which enables us to play football commentary at one end of the bar, jukebox upstairs, and a race commentary at the other end of the bar. But the engineer that came showed me how the mixer could be used to control the volume. And him and me reset the volumes. It's actually at the back of the box. No one knows where it is. There's tiny screws, and you can turn the volume, and they have been turned to the minimum on that mixer unit, which he feels was sufficient for us not to be generating a problem upstairs.
So the question I would ask is, why would you not just put a noise inhibitor in, which is industry standard? So it allows not one individual, but anybody who are in the premises at the time to both monitor it, and should there be any issues, be aware of how to ensure that it's put back into place.
He has given me a quote for a noise inhibitor, but we decided we'd only go down that route if we were to get any complaints with the system he's currently set up.
You've had 13 complaints over a period of months. That would suggest, at the very least, at the very least, a noise inhibitor, which is industry standard, will be placed to totally eradicate this issue ever. And it's monitored in terms of it tells you exactly what it's going to blast out. So the question once again is, so was it purely on a financial matter that you decided not to introduce this?
No, it was on the advice of the sound engineer, who said that would be below the limits. He's turned it down below the limits for the noise inhibitor.
So if I'm correct in what you've just said, you've introduced a device which will ensure the volume is at such a level it doesn't disturb anybody, but the only person in the business that can actually reset it, or whatever the technical jargon is, should it go wrong, is you.
Yeah. I'm the only one who knows how to adjust the sound in that pub, other than the sound engineer, of course.
So if it went wrong at 11:01 on a Saturday night and you wasn't there, so what provisions would you provide for somebody to actually, well, they wouldn't know because they don't know if anything is happening really?
It's effectively a volume control. On the sound system, there is a volume control on the front of the system. Unbeknownst to the staff, there is also a method of controlling the volume on the back of the system, which means that you're effectively reducing the volume that the amplifier can be put up to. So when we had the issues, if you turned the volume up to, I think it's 8 it goes up to, it would shake the building. Now, if you put the volume on full, it only goes to a certain volume, which is, as we said, we did check it.
Which is what number?
It's the volume on is still. It's effectively like they can only turn it up to 4.
You can understand why I'm labouring on this point. It's because we're here predominantly through noise nuisance.
I accept that, but what I'm saying is, I know we've had the level of complaints, but since I got the sound engineer in, I would be very surprised if we've had any complaints at all.
Do you keep a log, sir, at the bar for complaints, noise complaints, or even, as you have done previously, you refused entry? Do you keep any kind of log?
We do have a log for physical incidents, drug-related incidents, and the such.
Anything for noise in terms, for example, have you done a sort of leaflet drop to all the residents around you saying if there are any issues, these are our numbers, these are the contact names?
I regularly ask our 4 tenants upstairs if they have had any cause for complaint, and I speak to them on a daily basis.
When was the first time you spoke to these residents, sir?
Probably been about 2-3 years ago.
And you met them how often? So if you met them 2-3 years ago, I believe you said at the beginning you was not aware of these noise complaints. We have residents who have kept logs showing the times that these noise nuisances have happened. We've got an entry on, if you look on page 41 of your log, of your information pack.
The residents who are making...
I haven't finished the question, sorry. Sir. If you look on page 41 of your information pack. Have you got it? Yeah, right at the top. 2nd of the 11th, 2017, 11:15 to 4 o'clock in the morning. Stops me sleeping, disrupts my sleep patterns, affects my work and free time. I worry it is affecting my mental and physical, I think that's hopefully health, but help. Leaves me in a rage, which often prevents me from sleeping long after the noise itself has stopped. I am tired at work and spend a lot of my free time trying to catch up with sleep. Now, this is from a resident. Now, you're saying you've spoken to them 2 to 3 years ago. How often are these meetings taking place, or have you given them some sort of information where they can, contact numbers that they can actually contact you?
With regards to the residents making the complaint, there has been no contact with those residents.
Right, we move on to any questions from anybody else? Mr. Oni.
Could you tell me who's been authorising sale of alcohol since June when Darren Farrell left?
He didn't leave in June, he's still on the licence. The decision to remove Darren was only made the other day when the fine came through, and I had a chat with Kevin and insisted that James replace Darren.
So he's still on the licence, but you've released him from his employment?
He's actually in Cyprus at the moment, but when he gets back, yes.
Was that, I think, inside?
In Cyprus.
Oh, in Cyprus. I thought you said inside. I thought.
And
I'm getting old in the years again.
Perhaps that would
Too
be
much
an
crime
option.
and punishment watching, yeah.
And could James perhaps tell me, because he's going to be the licence holder, who's authorised to sell alcohol on the premises?
Who's currently authorised to sell alcohol on the premises? Just, I mean, do you want a list of the staff's names or just Darren? Do you want me just to say Darren Farrell?
No, whatever the arrangement is.
Okay, I mean, there's currently 5 members of staff which are currently authorised to sell alcohol on the premises by virtue of Darren's licence.
How are they authorised? Is it a global one or something different?
Not entirely sure at the moment but when I come in, it will be a written agreement.
Mr. Means.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we just cover from Mr. Fenwick what the arrangements are at midnight when the other bars close and how they control the door in relation to numbers and things like that? I mean, how many would you let in and not let in and things like that?
Mr. Fenwick.
Although it might not come across that well, there's obviously the advantage that I've been in the area for a long time and I know a lot of the faces. So I can't pretend that my decisions aren't made based on the people that I know to be trustworthy and those who aren't. Essentially, any rules that are normally inflicted upon doormen, if we are at capacity, I do not let anybody else in. In fact, I don't ever run it to capacity. I try and run it just a little bit less because I feel it's just a more comfortable environment to be in. If people are visibly intoxicated and not in a position in which they can hold themselves, I will not let them in. If they are under the required age of, well, our personal required age of 21, in turn, I will not let them in. As I say, I've worked in the area for a long time. There's a long list of people which I know happen to be barred from the local establishment. There isn't anything with regard to you can't get in with trainers on, you have to be dressed like this or you have to be dressed like that. There is just, I mean, we don't really like football shirts because it can often be a bone of contention for people. But essentially, the rules are just to be responsible, to not letting anyone who's already physically intoxicated, or I turn people away if they happen to have blood on them and things like that. You know, if it's clear they've been in altercations before. We do close the door at 1:30, so nobody is allowed to enter after 1:30. We do close the door if there has been any issues locally. There has been a couple recently. If there's an issue at any one of the other bars that essentially I can't police from where I am, so rather than just let in some people and none, I just close the door and have it locked down as of then.
Could I ask one more question? Could you ask Mr. Fenwick if he's seen the premises licence, which is shown on page 64 of your pack, Annex 3, which is a condition attached after a hearing at the local authority that says there shall be no admittance to the premises on Friday and Saturday nights after midnight. I wish we'd establish why that isn't happening.
I, hand on heart, can say I've not seen that before today.
If I could just add something which Councillor Gardner was alluding to earlier, was the need for 5 door staff. There is.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear the answer to the question what Mr. Means said. On page 64, if you go down to Annex 3, there's a condition there. There's no admission after midnight.
I was not aware of that concession at this point.
And do you have a prominent, clear and legible notice to that effect?
There will be, but there isn't one in at the minute.
So that's a no.
That is indeed.
Thank you.
If I could just add to the point that Councillor Gardner made regarding the 5 door staff. Part of the reason is there is a rear access to the pub upstairs, which can be opened from the inside, which people have a habit of opening to go out on the steps outside for cigarettes. The reason we need the extra staff is to man that back door to stop people who James is letting in at the front door going round the back and being let in by their friends. Hence the additional staff at the back of the pub.
Mr. Oakley.
Thank you. If you could ask on my behalf, Mr. Fenwick, he's been employed for 14 months, the last 14 months, predominantly at weekends. When all this has been going on, can he please tell us what he's going to do differently to how he's managed the door over the last 14 months?
Mr. Fenwick.
Well, to say over the last 14 months is unfair, but I believe. We have already started to manage the door differently. It's been far more stringent with regard to who we let in since we've been in receipt of the complaints. We, of course, turn the music off now at 1 a.m, which I believe that we're required to turn it off at past, but I turn the music off at 1 a.m. now. We do indeed close the back door so people don't have free access of it from 12 o'clock. Moving forward, I will definitely not be admitting people after 12 o'clock. But I believe we have implemented everything that we've been asked to do and everything that I can decide to do. I'm certainly going to put up notices to say, please respect our neighbours, and I also want to put up notices to insist that, well, other notices, just to let the customers know what the outcome will be if they are involved in antisocial behaviour.
Thank you. Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, a lot of these complaints have been about noise, and it's been one after the other. Did nobody at any point think, if we don't clean our act up, we're going to end up exactly where we are today?
I've been telling, when I've had complaints, the complaints I've had are from our own tenants in the 4 flats above the pub, and I have dealt with those with the owners because invariably they were the cause. I subsequent to that, although I had no contact with the tenants making the complaints, I would regularly check with our 4 tenants, was there any noise last night? And to be fair, this was invariably private sessions with the door locked when James wasn't even in attendance. And I have been, to a certain extent, banging my head against a brick wall, but it has now come to the stage where I think the owners realise their behaviour is unsustainable, and finally the penny has dropped. Very much too late for our neighbours concerned, but it has finally dropped. The other thing I should make clear is one of the tenants in the property which has been badly affected, I am in regular contact with, and I do also check with him is whether he's hearing any noise.
I think the point I'm trying to get to is obviously officers have been to the premises several times, and your staff have said yes, we'll turn it down or move forward. How do we know that this isn't going to happen again? And considering that on so many occasions there's been an opportunity to rectify things and it hasn't happened.
I think we'll both want to answer this. One, the steps I've carried out with the amplifier, they can't do it. Without putting their own sound system in there, they could not cause a nuisance.
And I feel, although I was physically there for 14 months, or known to the property for 14 months, known to the I was certainly not in the capacity of which I am going to be at the time. As Mr. Roberts has said, I would shut the door and I would go home and I would just get about my business. At 2:30, 3 o'clock, once everybody's been cleared from outside the pub, the awning comes in, the sign goes away, and I go home. That, of course, will not be the case now due to a increased responsibility towards the venue. But at the time, even though I will say I have been there for 14 months, I have not been there in this capacity for 14 months.
That's it. Right. Mr. Dormer, on page 64 of Annex 3, the condition which Mr. Oakley referred to, it says the conditions attached after a hearing by the licence authority. Are you aware of when this hearing took place?
I was aware of the condition existing, but I wasn't aware of the hearing when it took place.
Okay. Would anybody else be able to answer? No? Okay, we're going to move now on to closing remarks from each party, where we start with the licence holder first. So you make brief closing remarks. And for the other regulated authorities, if you would include in your summations whether you feel after what we have heard today, the conditions which you have asked for will be sufficient to uphold the licensing objectives. And if not, why? And then what other ones you would be willing to put forward. Okay, so it's just a brief closing remarks. So if we start off with Mr. Fenwick and Mr. Roberts.
I would just like to apologise that it's come to this. It should never have come this far. There's been some very irresponsible behaviour, but I would like to think that that has been put behind us. With James and myself going forward, there will be the pub will be a lot better behaved.
Thank you.
Of course, I concur with what Mr. Roberts has said. To further compound the fact, although I have been there in the whole time, I haven't been there in this capacity. My new role is not something I take lightly. It's something I want to get my teeth into, to actually make a positive impact, because, as I said, I have genuine affection for the community in the area. I know a lot of people, and a lot of people know me. I've been in and around the area for a long time. And it's no longer just a method of earning pound notes for me. This is something I would look to potentially make a career of, and hopefully bring a much-loved venue that is Captain Morgan's, bring it in line with what's being asked of it, and further benefit not only the employees but the community itself, which I don't think is outside of my skill set, or indeed anywhere near impossible. I think we can do this with the right team, and I fully intend on being very strict and stringent as of now, and doing what I can to improve the environment.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Means.
Thanks, Sharon. Clearly, this what's come out of this hearing is that this pub has been run in total disregard of the premises licence, unprofessional, naive, profit-driven, above care and consideration for others. That's clear. I don't think there's any dispute with that. And of course, the court issuing a £14,000 fine, it has given them somewhat a jolt. Mr. Fenwick speaks very well. I'm glad they brought someone along who has, in my opinion, a good presence about him, and I think he shows good. But however, the licence is still in the name and control of persons who have been unprofessional and naive. And it's for us to judge, or you to judge, sir, whether Mr. Fenwick and Mr. Roberts will be given long-term command and control of this pub over and above profits, which are obviously keen to be had by the owners of the premises. And I'm not sure whether they've done enough to convince you that they are in full command and control of this pub from here on out. Working on the conditions, my original conditions were to limit the control of music for entertainment after 11 o'clock. I'm still with that. I'm surprised that a small pub, as raised by Councillor Gardner, has need for 5 door supervisors, even if there is a smoking area at the back. Pubs, in my view, are controlled by the door. If you get the right people in, you don't need to control their behaviours because you've got the right people in. You don't need to subsequently arm yourself with door supervisors to control the rest of the evening. It's strange that a pub in a very nice area should need this sort of door level and surprising, and is obviously attracting a sort of person that requires that sort of control. And I think that the pub should look at who they're attracting, and they should change the style of entertainment, change the style of what they're doing to get rid of those sort of people who need that sort of level of supervision. So I would stay with the 11 o'clock end to music for now, and if it all goes well in the future, they can maybe make an application to increase their hours. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Means. Now we come to Mr. Oakley.
Thank you. My view has not changed. Nothing I've heard today has made me think that moving forward give me any more confidence that the pub will be run any differently. I think it's still very woolly in terms of Mr. Bates, who I engaged with in my witness statement, his involvement, his part owner with this other chap, Lenny Llewellyn. What's to say that they, as owners, they won't suddenly change next week, the week after, and say we're going to sack you, we're going to get a new licensee. I'm just not confident, and I'm further not confident that Mr. Fenwick or Mr. Roberts didn't seem to be aware of the current licensing conditions in terms of signage and in terms of readmittance after midnight. And their whole explanation and basis is that you go from one bar, the Geo bar, which shuts at 1, to basically get those customers to go in after 1. I would like to see the premises close at 11 o'clock Sunday to Thursday and close at midnight Friday and Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dormer.
Thank you, Chairman. I have one concern that's obviously come out during the process of the review and this hearing, which I have to be honest, I wasn't aware of at the start of the process. I was expecting a DPS variation and possible transfer of the licence prior to the hearing going ahead today. However, that hasn't happened. My only concern is with the mandatory conditions of number 1 and 3 is that I think Mrs. Sonny touched on it earlier, which is is there actual clear authorisation of the sale of alcohol taking place at Captain Morgan's, and obviously in the mandatory conditions of number 1, I'm not convinced that there is actually a DPS in place, even though there is still a DPS named on the licence.
Thank you. Right. I will now ask everybody to leave, so it gives a chance for the committee to deliberate, and we shall call you back when finished. If you would like to take all your bags and phones and everything else with you as well, please. Thank you.